Okay, in this hand we're 17 big blinds deep. We min raise queen jack of spades and our opponent flats. Now we flop queens and c-bet and our opponent clicks it back. So let's go over his ranges here and say what is the best play versus the majority of that range. Option A, he has his beat. The money's getting regardless, we're not folding. Option B, he has a flush draw. He's not folding it this shallow, so reason doesn't accomplish anything but folding out his bluffs. If he does have a flush draw and it hits, I'm getting stacked no matter if I flat or if I check raise get it in. And then there's option C, that he's bluffing. So if I do raise here, I'm only going to fold out any chips that may have continued barreling if I just call. And there is some hands like 3-5 and gut shots like 5-6 in his range also, which will fold to a shove but probably continues barreling if I flat and turning river is blanks. So in my opinion the best action is just a call here. So I do just flat and the turn is an 8 and our opponent shoves all in. So it's an easy call this shallow, and you can't see your opponent just had a total bluff. So in my opinion flatting was the best option given his hand and the majority of his range. Here we min raise ace 9 deep. Our opponent flats and on the flop he leads into us pretty small. We could raise, but I do like to keep my opponent's bluffs in, which are close to dead versus me, which are just going to fold to a raise. We could raise and protect versus queen x and 6x, but that's only a part of his range and we're trying to exploit the majority of his range. If we do raise here to protect versus his weaker pairs, we sort of somewhat make our hand look to him like aces, which makes the hand for him easier to play against. So our opponent might call one street but fold the turn when he doesn't improve, and we will end up loading the pot the times that he does turn 2 pair and raises us. So just by flatting I expect our opponent to think that we would raise aces on the flop, so I do expect him to think that he can 3-barrel me off my worst hands by the river. So I do check call all 3 streets. And as you can see, he just had total air, which he probably thought he was trying to get me to fold a weaker hand than aces. In this hand our opponent limps into us and we check back jack 9. Flop is 9-10 jack, so we do flop 2 pair. I go for a check raise and villain clicks it back. I do just call here because I do expect villain not to do this with a vulnerable hand and draws, so I expect this to be a straight or a bluff, hoping that I was check raising light. So against those hands I think flatting is best. If he has a straight, we are getting snap call when we shove and folding out his bluffs, so that's why I think flatting is best. Turn is a 4 and he shoves and we call. So you can see in the flop that he was just clicking it back with air, and we did just call, allowing him to shove the turn pretty slim. In this hand we're against a reg I used to battle when I played 15s and 30s. So I do open 9-5 of spades and get flatted. We flop a pair and a flush draw and we get check raised. Against type players that are only raising with aces here to protect their hand on a wet board, I would flat, and if we hit our hand we can value bet the turn and river. But against regs that are check raising worse flush draws here, I think we should always be 3-betting with the equity we do have. If he has a hand like 6-8 of spades, we want the money going in now, and versus lone ace x we are around 50%. So reason with equity that good with the added bonus of fold equity too, with the semi-bluff hand, is going to be plus EV. So I do check raise and our opponent just flats. One thing I do know about this opponent from experience is that his check raise range isn't always polarized, so he can also check raise here with medium pairs for information. Turn is a blank, and I decided to check this back because I don't want to get check shoved on with equity this good. So the river is a 9 and he checks it to me. Because I don't bet the turn, I think he knows that I don't have ace X, because he thinks I would bet that for protection on the turn on that weight of a board. So I think by overshoving we can really level him hard into a call here with 10s or aces, because my range looks polarized now with the flush draw, with the miss flush draw being a big part of that range. It needs to bluff now to win. He won't expect my value to check back turn and shove river, because I should bet the turn for protection versus draws. So this line will look more like a missed draw that was checking back to realise its equity. In these spots where our hand looks like a bluff when we shove with the line we took, I think it's important we do go for max value versus value betting small, versus players that can understand what perceived range looks like in certain spots when we do polarize our range. So always remember, if the stacks are set up right for a river shove on our hand looks like a bluff, and our opponent is calling a shove and a value bet, we're only losing out on chips the times we don't shove and bet small. So I do decide to shove, and he does call. So you can see that by shoving he was kind of leveled into a call, just like he thought he would be with the pair of 10s. In these situations where your line doesn't really make sense to your opponent, you can even make your hand look even more weaker by overshoving versus value betting. A good reg will understand that if you're trying to fold out his bluff catchers, that it's easier and less risk for him to call a small value bet than an overshove. So he will think this is what the overshove is trying to accomplish, and he can level himself into calls. So in this hand we get min raised at 25 big blinds. I think our hand is too good to fold our 3-bet bluff, so flatting is just fine. We flop by a medium flush draw and a straight draw. Again, I think flatting is just best, because we don't want to call a jam if we check raise and our opponent shoves. So turn is offsuit 7, and we check with the intention of shoving. There is a lot of worse hands that will call this. Top pair with a flush draw, any pair with the ace of clubs, and some 2 pairs and sets. He does call, and unfortunately we're drawn dead on the turn, but I do think it's important to show hands. I do get stacked, but I feel I played the hand the most optimal way.